Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca, a co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson, writer and teacher Jessica, and community organizer and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find that linked on our blog and a link to our blog, on the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode where we found this episode. Thank you. Let's see. So we'll be discussing today, as part of our discussion, Roe versus Wade, which for the past 2 weeks have been inundating all of social media as well as all of the internet. I know it's on my feed wherever I'm listening to any podcast. It's everywhere. So I imagine there's a lot to say, and we didn't say anything after the draft that was leaked by the Supreme Court here in the USA. So we will see if we can share our thoughts join the conversation and share our evolving thoughts on it. I remind folks that if you have listened to us, whether you are new or whether you are maybe you just didn't want to listen to past episodes, which I don't think you should, I'm kidding, you can always check out our previous episodes. We did, Andy and I, when we started this channel / podcast, we did an episode on abortion and our stance on it and women's rights and people's choices. And so we will post that in the episode notes and wherever you found this episode. And, Jessica and Kenny at the time weren't with us. So I hope that in this discussion, they will share their thoughts, their views, their stances, and what maybe it was before. So with that said, let's jump into it.
Just to say that the kickoff for all this news cycle stuff that's going on about Roe v. Wade and abortion rights, just to be clear, was a seemingly leaked memo from a Supreme Court justice, I don't remember who it was, who was basically saying, we think we're going to be able to take down Roe v. Wade somehow. Those details were never clear to me. I probably didn't look closely enough. But if anybody knows, that I think was the kickoff, supposed kickoff for this whole, I don't know, theater right. Thing going on.
Yeah, and there's a lot of anti-abortion protests that have been happening, supporters of abortion rights as well, just gathered outside the Supreme Court. I know in San Francisco when I was biking, it was this massive protest over the weekend and lots of just coverage around it. And, and we live here in California. Jessica, you live in, I forget, Idaho.
Oregon.
Right? Oregon.
Idaho. Oregon.
Sorry. Well,
they want to be Idaho in my county.
All right. Well, here in California, the governor, Gavin Newsom, came out very staunchly and said that they will try and add permanent protections for the procedure in the California Constitution. So that's something that I know. I'm just curious what that would look like. And fly out people to states. New York has said that, where it's legal to get an abortion.
I just wanted to add that we even had a pro-life Spider-Man climb the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco. So it's definitely created a stir among people. Again, supposedly there is public debates about this, and I guess we'll maybe get into it later. But for me, this is not even about that topic itself, because just like you guys mentioned, it was a leak, right? And we've had many leaks that have served a political purpose, and we're just around the corner from an election cycle, or we are in an election cycle, essentially. And so whenever I hear a leak, that's never accidental, that's purposeful and placed in a particular context. And so for me, that's a big part of this conversation. And yeah, I will be happy to share my thoughts, I guess, on the actual, abortion debate, if there should even be one, yeah, for me, that is the focus. It's not so much about whether it's actually under attack, because I used to work close to a Planned Parenthood for years, and it closed in San Francisco. What happened to that? And so that's another story.
Should I go, or Andy, you want to go?
No, you should. You can go, and I do think it's because I think we did 2 episodes before And I think maybe I can just say that both Eduardo and I came out in those episodes and said, we both support women's right to choose, to decide what she does with her body, with the pregnancy, really at any point in time. And in my case, any point in time along the first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, it's something that's happening in a woman's body. She has the right to decide what she's going to do about it. That's my feeling about it. So, and it's connected to the idea that I want a society where everyone is equal, men, women, immigrant, non-immigrant. And so part of being equal is going to be able to control what happens to your body.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all professed that we're pro-choice, previously, like on abortion, not just broadly. But well, I'm gonna think how to start. I always hate framing statements. I guess, I mean, I want to hear what you guys, think, especially in light of this recent spectacle.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think for my part, and I'm guessing, I don't know, we'll see if there's kind of disagreement among us, even though we all do kind of hold that pro-choice foundation. I think the main thing that I'm hoping to kind of get across, or like argument that I want to make, is that yes, abortion should be legal. Yes, the legality question of it is important. But for my part, especially in light of the past few years, I don't think legalization is the liberation, that we've been told that it is. So that's kind of the direction I want to go. I mean, I feel like, I don't know, I was trying to organize some of my thoughts before we filmed, and I wrote down a few notes and I didn't get very far, but I feel like in order to have that larger conversation about, like, is this really about like the legal question? And if it's not, why not? And if it is, why, I guess. But for me, I mean, I just feel like to kind of contextualize it, and also just, I'm like wary of being misunderstood, like when I get into some of my views, which I know I said a little bit in a previous episode. I mean, I'm pro-choice. I think abortion should be entirely legal, yes, during any trimester at any point. And I think, like, what is society criminalizes says a lot about that society, right? So it's not that I don't think the issue of abortion is important. With like this recent thing, I totally agree with Kenny. Like, it's a spectacle. I think we all know it's a spectacle. It's just like an attempt to weaponize so-called reproductive rights to gain votes, I think. And like, I mean, yeah, like there's a lot of leaks in different contexts, but I mean, there's never been a Supreme Court opinion draft leaked ever. This is the first one. And so for my part, like pretty much from the get-go, I was like, it doesn't sound good, but I mean, come on, like, are we really supposed to believe that this just happens to be the one, like the first one that leaks just happens to be this one, and it just happens to be right in the lead up to a midterm election where we know the Dems are about to get freaking walloped. Like, I just feel like people are getting played. They don't give a shit. Like, they don't give a shit about a woman's right to abortion. These politicians and judges, like, they've proven that they don't. Like, they could have codified this stuff during Obama, like, it's literally 50 years old. It's like, I mean, they don't care about you. It's just a big publicity media stunt. And especially, like, I mean, we're supposed to just forget about the $33 billion of weapons that we're sending, or wait, it's 40 now, right? Mm-hmm. They upped it. And the price of oil and the food shortage and the past 2 years of like complete fucking hell that you've been put through. And now it's like, no, you have to stand by women. And the way that you have to stand by women is by voting like your life depends on it again. Like, it's just, yeah. I mean, you're just like, it's like asking your abuser to be the one to save you. Again, I feel like we've made that analogy before. So yeah, in terms of the actual league, like I don't know. I mean, I don't really think they're gonna overturn it. I really don't. It's just such a useful political weapon, like every time around on both sides. I could be wrong about that, but ultimately, I think there's bigger like underlying questions about just bodily autonomy and I mean, this is the whole thing, like the whole stuff, it all rings so hollow because the people who are yelling that we have to defend bodily autonomy of women are the same people that just spent 2 years like bending over backwards to deny people bodily autonomy when it comes to medical decisions like masks and having an experimental gene therapy injected into your veins. So it's just crazy. Like the hypocrisy is crazy. I actually saw like there was a protest on my former campus with people holding signs saying "My body, my choice," which is just crazy because I was there leading protests where people had signs that said "My body, my choice," and we were like accosted and screamed at and just, I mean, it's just crazy. And then the other thing, like the whole thing also rings hollow to me because again, like the people who are yelling, um, about like women's rights and all of this crap, like they've also spent recent years trying to vaporize the whole concept of a woman altogether. So like I know we don't necessarily all agree on the whole like gender war stuff, but I have my former union sent out, like I'm sure every union in the country sent out, this panicked message after the leak. And I'll just read like the first couple sentences. And I mean, just pay attention to the number of times that they say women or girls. Spoiler alert, it's 0. So they say, take action for reproductive rights. On Tuesday, UAW members joined with thousands of others in Seattle for a powerful rally and a march in defense of reproductive rights. While the leaked Supreme Court draft opinion that would overturn Roe v. Wade is not yet finalized, it poses a far-reaching attack on abortion rights for people of all genders in the U.S., the latest in a wave of attacks on reproductive rights and the rights of trans and queer youth across the country. In particular, this would disproportionately impact abortion access for those who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, or low income. And I mean, it's not like, yes, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and low income. Women, though, like they leave out the main word. And I just feel like this is so emblematic of just liberal discourse right now. Like you can't fucking advocate for a group of people if you can't name them. And we're a sex-based class, and that class is called women, and it doesn't include men. Like it just doesn't. Like we can't create a movement to fight for abortion rights or take down patriarchy or whatever. Like you can't fight for that when you're not living in reality. And it's, I don't know. And the language is important, but it's not just about the language, like in whatever this union messaging or wherever, but it's, it's about material conditions of our lives. And men don't give birth, like they don't have abortions, and to argue otherwise, I just feel like is part of this whole like transhumanist set of lies. So for me, like it's just really frustrating to watch the response, and it's just actually really mind-boggling that these people take themselves seriously. Like I don't know. So anyway, that's kind of my, I don't know, part of like my skepticism and just kind of irritation. in terms of the context for this, like given the past few years. But I do think there's something sort of more important that's underlying it that I'd hopefully like to get into and hear your guys' thoughts in terms of like, I don't know, just the whole rights thing, and like why should we be asking for rights from our government that we already have?
And I'm going to reiterate some of the stuff I had said before. I mean, there are just one tiny aspect that I think, as I'm hearing Jessica speak, that I'm agreeing with. I think at the time when I shared my thoughts on what's left of an episode that Andy and I did, I saw legalization as a way to sort of protect people, and I thought voting was important in order for communities not to be criminalized for their, what I continuously said as their legal right to get access to an abortion. No, I do believe in bodily autonomy, and it relates to COVID because I do believe bodily autonomy. I'm pro-choice. I think that people should not, or big brother, big government, any sort of centralized power should not interfere with your personal choices. And I think that that's huge for me, but I'm not seeing it as huge as it currently is, or maybe people's misunderstanding of it, for the Republicans or Democrats. So whether you are conservative or whether you are liberal, I see both doing something that is contradictory to where they stand. And I see conservatives talking about the being pro-choice about our bodies with regards to vaccines, but I don't see them being the same way standing up for bodily autonomy and their pro-choice stance as it relates to abortions. I see liberals advocating for pro-choice stance around abortion and women's, or using birthing people's rights, etc. But then I don't see them standing for the very same when it comes to being pro-choice around our bodily autonomy around our body. It's hypocrisy on both sides. And this is why when I tell some friends, who Kenny knows one of them in particular, my friend Jake, who listen, or who, when we talk about these things, and he says, well, Florida is a free state or whatever because of COVID restrictions that were very loose. I also see it, and I know we're not going to be talking about the bill right now on, well, as commonly known as the Don't Say Gay bill, which is more than that. It's not just about Don't Say Gay bill. It's a little misleading, but around my friend Jake and I speak almost daily, and we've been childhood friends, but he and I have completely missed differences on around. We were both Bernie supporters, and then all of a sudden he is supportive of Republicans, and as he had come on the show before, he is a Trump supporter, and he has put his eggs in his, or he has, or what's the expression? I don't know the English expression of all your eggs in one basket, something like that. But well, his confidence in Republicans for certain things. And I'm thinking, what? Florida is not a free state if they're policing free speech, or they're just policing speech. Florida is not a free state, I tell him, if they're going to be policing people's bodies and their bodily autonomy. Sure, about the vaccines, they're not right now. They're not having campaigns to vaccinate children as other states, like here in California. And they're not coming out with mandates, but you're certainly criminalizing abortion. That's going to come onto the books now. So as far as my stance around legalization, I'm now taking up that stance that Jessica's taking, as she was speaking about. You're right. I don't think that we should be supportive of any sort of, whether it's pro or con or whatever, about any legalization. I think, as what I've been reading on anarchist views, it's like you have, like, I don't understand why I didn't say this before. And the first time we recorded this, Andy, you cannot depend on the government to give you any alleviation. And that, for me, is an evolving stance. It's like a religious stance to get away from that, because sometimes I'm very disillusioned that I don't see working class struggle rising to the level that I would like to see, as people stood up in Colombia against the COVID restrictions, or when there were people out on the streets during Black Lives Matter. Where was that for restrictions? or I see now people talking about bodily autonomy all over social media. Where is that stance when it comes to bodily autonomy around people mandating? So obviously this game is, and maybe you're right, maybe they won't overturn it, Jessica. I'm not sure, because it is a very important, crucial part of, election time, fishing people's votes, I said this in the episode as well before, Mexico, I'm not saying this to be, just because I'm Mexican, but because it is, it's like the forefront, it's like it's less recognized, but forefront of the Mexico and US relationship. It's just right there on the border. And, that's where a lot of Ukrainians were going through. That's where Venezuelans are going through. That's where Cubans right now were arrested recently and going through, and they're releasing them back to their countries. Haitians, lots of people there. And in Mexico, there are places where you can actually get your abortion pills. And if you're not able to get access in this country that is restricting everyone's rights and liberties, I'm not saying Mexico is the country of the freedom, because it has lots of issues, but you can always get it. And I want people to know that, because there's still ways you can still get it. But, it's always been this underground railroad to southbound of U.S. restrictions. Mexico began to gradually abolish slavery soon after they declared independence of Spain in 1821. And so lots of slaves ran away there during the HIV crisis, when medications were not allowed in this country because it has to be FDA approved. People went down to Mexico to go get those medications. And then for vaccines, for vaccine cards and all that, people went down to Mexico to get vaccine cards, and still are getting those vaccine cards. And people can go get abortion, surgical or pills or whatever. So if you want to go get that, just go down south. And it's unfortunate that, it's the country right next to this other liberal freedom country where constitutionally you're not allowed to, it's not criminal to get an abortion in Mexico. And there are organizations, I just want to mention the advocacy group Las Libres, which is a part of a network that helps people on both sides of the border to access abortion pills, which I'll link to in the episode notes if anyone wants to get that information, because I do think people need to have access to their right to choose. Back to the USA, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, unfortunately, I realized, as we were talking last time, sort of made me feel like, oh, well, there's maybe this sliver of hope that, this thread. But then I said in the episode before that she might just go against, lifting restrictions on mandates. And so you have conservatives doing this, and you have liberals doing this assault on people's rights to their autonomy, to their right to decide what they want to do for themselves. And if you're listening to this and you have a stance, or you think that Republicans are going to liberate you, or you think Democrats are going to liberate you, or you think that by voting, which I've now decided, this is sad, but I've now decided not to be voting for certain, I don't vote mostly if there's an election that was being done, about this, Kenny, with David Campos, and I didn't vote. And that's going to make a lot of my liberal friends upset, or progressive friends upset, and I just don't see hope anymore in those. And I was looking at the recent ballots that are coming in through the mail. It's so sad. And I have a hole that I was digging in my garden because I put paper in the garden. Because you don't put paper in the compost, or you don't put in the recycling, because it doesn't actually go to recycling here in SF. That's a lie. It doesn't. So I put paper I make holes, and so I just put the ballots in the hole. So I grow things from there, because paper, like trees and like wood, if you don't use it, it retains moisture. For people who are in the permaculture community, they know this. But if you want to be drought tolerant, friendly garden, you want to put paper or wood in the ground. Anyhow, back to the conversation. So my ballots are being used to retain water for my crops. Yes, Mia, so sad. But
congratulations,
we've come to another age.
Congratulations.
You have to make this like a global movement. Bury your ballots for the environment.
That's truly ecological right there.
Although I suspect it's closer to salting the earth but putting ballots into the ground.
But if you have, but that's why if you have mycelium growing, you have mycelium growing in the garden, they will take care of any sort of chemicals that come from the ink or whatever.
I just mean the evilness of those things.
Oh.
But no, I think it's wonderful. It's great. Oh, were you done? I'm sorry.
No, that's it. That's my stance. And I go to Mexico if you need to go get something, some drug. Auntie went there and got ivermectin. So, and
definitely send your ballots to Eduardo so we can grow more plants and compost. I don't think that's breaking the law either. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the part
ballot harvesting.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on because it's making me.
Oh, it's funny. So I think the part where we all agree is that this is political theater. It is what is on balance here before us in the mainstream media between the political parties is not something about the fate, but it's not really about the right of women to control their bodies. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the November election. And if you didn't see this, I will share my screen because I saw this on Jimmy Dore and I thought it was pretty funny. This article that he cited right here. So this says Democrats hope threat to abortion rights will rouse voters. This article came out December 2nd, 2021. It's in US News. And there was a quote down here. Democrats have been sounding the alarm on abortion rights in nearly every election cycle this century, including last month's stunning defeat in Virginia's governor race. In most cases, it's Republicans who still have shown to be more motivated. Still, as the Supreme Court's conservative majority signals a willingness to weaken or reverse the landmark Roe versus Wade precedent. Again, this is 4 months before the leak. Democrats insist they can convince voters that the threat to women's health is real and present in a way it wasn't before, and thereby change their fortunes in the election, because they want to stop what they see as a red wave coming in November. So I don't really know how you could say much more that proves like they're putting this out in December and here it comes. It's like, so that's what this thing's about. And I appreciate, Jessica, what you said about like not wanting to open up another line, because I think there's other areas to talk about, like, is Roe v. Wade even worth defending? And to talk about state-controlled health care that's administering abortions and that's affecting women's bodies. Like, is that something worth fighting for? There's something to be talked about there, but I also think what you said when you reference this question of wait, they just talked about abortion rights and access to reproductive rights, but they don't mention women. That is significant to me. And I know that what they're talking about is, well, they're saying what they're talking about is an inclusivity. We don't want to like leave out other people who aren't women who might be wanting to get pregnant or what have you. But it obscures way more than it reveals in its so-called inclusiveness, because this is an attack on women, and it does need to be understood as an attempt. Like, there's been a long history, it's just like you're saying, and this is true in the Marxist tradition, but also in the stuff that you had us read, Jessica. Who was the person who the reading you sent about the?
Federici?
Say again.
Silvia Federici.
Yeah, like that. The U.S. or the capitalist state, the state has wanted to control the women's reproduction for quite some time. Turn it on and turn it off. In the same way we talk about immigration as a way of controlling the flow of labor back and forth, there has been all sorts of efforts by the capitalist state to criminalize abortions because there was a need for more labor at some point in time. And so that state hasn't changed. That state has not become any more a friend of women, and as in terms of allowing them to have control over that decision. So I think the notion of talking about reproduction without mentioning women actually obscures the idea that this is an attack on women, and that men can be mobilized to try to like say, no, you can't talk. You can't attack our sisters. You can't attack our comrades who are women. And I do think it has to be understood as a part of fighting sexism and fighting the history of sexism, is the idea that men and women will have common fights that they will need to wage, even if I'm not a person who's planning on having, well, I can't have a baby, So I do think that's an important, like, it's politically important for them to obscure the divide that they're trying to put between men and women on this. That's how I would see that. I guess I have more to say, but I'll see if you want to say something about that, Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, I think you captured it well. I think a lot of people, even if they don't buy into the whole gender ideology as inclusion thing, still kind of dismiss it as just like, oh, it's politically correct language, but like at base, they're still like standing with you. And I think that's a pretty like mythical way to view it. And I think like in the same way that union email that I read just collapses reproductive rights with gender ideology and trans rights, quote unquote, and like gender affirming healthcare coming from the state, all of that kind of stuff. Like this is becoming a massive pattern. You see it in the Florida bill. You see it in the way that the Roe v. Wade freakouts are being framed, because it's not just like people are pivoting immediately to like, they're going to overturn this. And then immediately also gay marriage is going to be reversed, and it's going to be used as this precedent for like to attack all queer people and all trans people and all everybody. Like, and I just don't think there's like the cultural zeitgeist is not going that direction, and B, I don't think that that's even legal. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but from what I have read, that's not likely to happen, even if it is overturned and abortion is criminalized in some states. So anyway, just to say, like, I think that collapsing of reproductive rights and the whole like gender affirming ideology, which is like inseparable from pharmaceutical, industrial, like healthcare and medicine, that whole industry, it's a very sinister strategy in my eyes, because at base, right, reproductive rights means women have the power to control their own bodies and to control their own labor. Gender affirming ideology seeks to erase the category of women altogether, right? To say like, oh, like gender is just this like cultural construct that you can just identify however you want. And that has really real repercussions for women and girls' safety and basic human dignity. You know, kind of like I talked about in previous episodes, but like the same people who are saying like, oh, like women aren't walking wombs, we're not baby incubators, right? They're also arguing that if a man pops some synthetic hormones or has his genitalia amputated in a cavity, like surgically carved into him, that somehow makes him a woman or like affirms that he is a woman. So it's categorically like oppositional fights being collapsed. Like you can't like it just that email that I read is just such a perfect articulation of it. Like you can't have both. And like I understand the like why the inclusivity framing works, but it's not accurate. Like it's not, if you're fighting for abortion rights, like you're not being inclusive if you're not saying women, you know? I don't know. And it's like a really easy way to kind of like flip the argument and have it be like, well, you know, you're white, so it's easy for you to say, or like, you know, you're middle class, so it's easy for you to say. And in some sense, like that whole privilege thing is true, right? Especially when it comes to abortion. And like, yeah, I love that Eduardo's like shepherding people to Mexico to get their COVID vaccine cards and their abortions. But one, I don't think you actually need to go to Mexico to have a safe abortion. That's a different thing. But you know, the big thing people bring up is like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, they're not going to criminalize abortion in Oregon or Washington or California or whatever. But if you're poor, if you're, Black or poor, whatever, pick your minority, right? That you're not going to be able to travel to a different state. And there's validity to that. I think, the whole thing is about class warfare, both in terms of like women as a sex-based class, and then also within that, right? Yeah, it's disproportionately going to hurt Black women, Indigenous women. But I guess what I would argue with that, and sorry, I'll just say this and then I'll stop rabbiting on, but yes, those are the people who suffer the most when shit like abortion is criminalized or vaccines are required for employment or whatever. They are also the women who suffer the most within the confines of the system, the legal system, the medical system, whatever. And like at the hands of that system, right? So, maternal, what do they call it? Maternal mortality rate, right, is such a perfect example. So the maternal mortality rate in this country is like, I think it's 4 or 5 times higher for Black women, even when you account for socioeconomic disparities, that is super key to understanding that statistic, because it tells you that it's not about access. Like it's not an access issue. Like that tells you that however glossy they dress it up to be, right, or to sound through the rhetoric, if you are a Black female, the system itself is not set up to support you or heal you or help you or whatever, right? Like, great, you have Roe v. Wade, but what I would argue is like that does nothing to protect you, because being in the system is just as dangerous for those women as it is to be essentially like kicked out of that system, if not worse in some cases.
I guess that's kind of, where I was heading next about like the class aspect of it, because I did wonder, if it, because I do think that often we talk about issues in these glossy terms, right? Like immigrants, as if everyone's a monolith, Latinos, women, and there are obviously layers, like there are people who look like me, but absolutely don't have the same experience as me in this world, right? Like that's a given, especially if you're of a higher class, and I was wondering, like, yes, I'm not denying racism, I'm not denying sexism, all the isms, right? They exist for a reason in this system. But I do wonder, at least before you started commenting on that subject, Jessica, I was thinking that the burden falls on the lower classes, because if you are of a certain means, even if this country like doesn't, allow you to, or this state doesn't allow you to have an abortion, you have the means to go somewhere else. I'm not saying that should be the case for people, right? But my point is, I guess that's where my head was heading, that this is a burden more on certain people. And I guess that was to support my comment on this. Actually shows the viciousness of the people that are waving this as a hook, right? Because they're willing to sacrifice a sector, right? They did it with the vaccines, right? The vaccine mandates. I think they're doing it with this because I don't know if it may or may not be on the return. I think that the people who are posting this as putting this chip in the game are willing to sacrifice the most vulnerable always, and so, like, again, I think it's important to talk about what you're saying. It's giving me a lot to think about. But what I do know is that the people that quote unquote leak this shit, they're vicious and they're ruthless. They're willing to sacrifice people, and put them in harm's way in order to get their political ends. Because in the result that they want, just like we talked about the Supreme Justice that was just, what was her name?
Ketanji
Brown Jackson.
Just like we commented on her appointment, her being waved in front of us as, steering more racism. This thing too here, this supposed attack, this supposed thing is not to rally the troops to defend something. It's actually to rally the troops so they actually, I think it makes sense in this specific context, because you have a very polarized people, like the anti-vaxxers, right? Who you might think, have a tendency to be anti-abortion, right? And so in this very moment, it actually makes sense that they're waving this shit. They're adding more fuel to the fire. They're like, you see, now you have more contradictions. Like, keep fighting. Like, we'll be fine. And like, none of these conversations will get resolved, in that sense. Because again, the point of it is not to create debate or conversation to solve anything. It's actually to create more problems so that we are busy, pointing fingers at each other. Because, if anything, I would hope that this, right, like, look, you're being hypocrite. You're being a hypocrite. We're both getting got. That would be the result. But I don't think that would be the result. The result would be to keep engaging in these debates, about pro-life, anti-life, these binaries, right, that they know that play well. And they're simplistic enough, to invite more people into the conversation to keep us busy and not get anything done and point fingers at each other, not even see each other as human, and feel self-righteous. And I think that's the point of this. It's not even like to defend anything or to protect anything. And if anything too, it's like that whole Roe versus Wade that I guess we talked about. It's another conversation, but it's always like, oh, we're defending the crumbs that they gave us, right? It's always about that. It's not about collapsing this system and like, fuck you, like, we were not going to follow your rules. It's always about defending the crumbs that they wave in front of us. It's fighting for that hook that they decided to play at some point, because this election cycle right now for the liberals is about abortion rights, right? The last election cycle is about immigrant rights, right? It was Russiagate. It's about sensible gun regulation. Pick your sound bites. That's kind of my point. And I don't want to diminish this conversation about women protection and this stuff. I want to contextualize it in terms of they wave a single issue, in front of us to keep us playing in their system, in their game, and getting us to the ballot box to show submission.
I have had some ongoing. Tell me if I'm off and I'm not sticking to the topic, because my mind is really disorganized right now. It's not sure. So I have had some conflicting thoughts as I was reading some of the things that Jessica sent in an email that were resourceful. And I have my tabs out. I was looking over them today. And so there are a few things I'm worried about. And I do think that as it is right now, right? Like as we are currently, right, as we are where we are right now, this capitalist state obviously has these divisions, but the experiences are definitely there. Like racism and sexism are strongly experienced, right? They are strongly experienced. And I do believe in working class struggle, working class folk coming together. I'm not interested, as I said to my friend Jake, and I had a discussion with him recently, in making anyone feel guilty, whether they be a man or whether they be white. But that's not, I'm not interested. I don't think that feeling guilty over past or even current actions of people of that race or people of this gender or etc. are to be used. I don't think I think guilt has nothing to do with what I'm trying to ask from folks. Is I'm trying to ask people to understand that the way I look is the way I'm seen, or the way that women have been used are things that have been that it's still, there's this mechanism that is still being used today that isn't like something we create in our mind. It's something that's happening today, and I'm trying to figure out how much, as I was really impacted by the conversation you all had that I was not present to, but I listened to it on the podcast around trans and also some feminist views that Jessica shared, how much of what transgenderism could be or potentially be used as a Trojan horse for our liberation of certain societal expectations on us, that could be used to ignore women's plights, because they do, and trying to figure out maybe the PC way of saying this, because I'm thinking of constantly we're all recording, but women obviously have a different anatomy. There's like a material anatomy, like it's not like something you can just say we are just, you know, the same. Like obviously I do think that we are able to achieve many of the same things when it comes to competence and intelligence, and it comes to other things, but I think there is obviously there is a difference on our physical anatomy. I understood, like from what the discussion you all had, was that there could potentially be, as I also pulled out the geneticliteracyproject.org article that Jessica sent, that there is a seismic shift in the debate over abortion as reproductive rights, and all of this is being discussed, that where we could create artificial wombs in this fourth industrial revolution, and slowly just forget that women are then also just, I mean, I don't think there's anything compared to a real womb, a woman's body. I think that's completely impossible. But that we're going to start ignoring how women's bodies have always been used, and the impact of just forgetting the women's issues. I don't know how else to put it, just forgetting those issues, that how much women have been impacted by the world that we live in a very patriarchal society, which has been dominated by men. I do think that I just was reading also just how many societies, very few societies are matriarchal, which are wonderful societies, but I think the diversity of those societies haven't been achieved because of colonialism. It just happens to, if anyone reads Germs, I read the book Germs, Steel and Guns, I may be saying it incorrectly. It's not because white people or men are necessarily inherently better off. It's just, it has to do with lots of conditions and circumstances that have allowed to that have oppressed and also just made matriarchal societies disappear. So I don't think that we've allowed for matriarchal societies to thrive, like we haven't allowed for socialist or anarchist societies to thrive, because capitalist societies tend to be stronger and they use brutal force, as men have as well in a patriarchal society. So I do believe that there are issues that we need to look at, and there are things to consider. I don't know, it's all up in the air the way I'm thinking about it. I haven't really organized my thoughts. I've been contemplating about it as I was washing the dishes today. And so it's something I'm still trying to figure out, because how do you measure? I'm not trying to say like oppression Olympics is, don't want that, but how do we also bring forth that our differences there are going to be huge differences in the way that we function as a society when it comes to women's need to have their issues considered differently from the way that men's issues are. Because it's like race, I almost see race could be something that can be potentially, I mean, some people might disagree with me, slowly fade away. It's in some society that we create, but I don't know how, like I don't see women and men's bodies fading away. Like it doesn't, like you can't, materially, it's always going to be different. And that means that different issues are going to arise from that. But I can see race, just as you had pointed out a long time ago, Andy, when I talked to you and I said, do you think that racism could actually be eradicated? And you said, well, if we look at people's eye color, do you remember this conversation, Andy? Eye color could potentially, like, people don't judge people on people's eye color. I think they do. But what you're trying to tell me, Andy, at that time was that somehow race is like, because it's such a physical thing, it's like, it's the more, especially I think if people become more biracially ambiguous, it could be different. And the more we integrate, etc., I think that we could, these concepts of race can be constructed. But I don't see how bodily, like, anatomy is constructed. That's not, we are clearly different. And I'm struggling even having this conversation because I sound like a right-winger when I talk, because Jake tells me sometimes, you know, there are differences between men and women, and that in liberal circles is not something you discuss. You don't say that there are differences. You're supposed to say there are no differences except that, and we're all the same. And I do think there are differences. Obviously, there are differences. I mean, so there are going to be issues that are going to arise from those differences. And that's where I'm coming from as I'm trying to organize my thoughts. And I'm not articulating them quite well. So forgive me for any of this.
I think you sound more materialist than right wing. And Andy and Kenny are supposed to be the materialists.
Go ahead, Kenny, and I'd like to get on this too.
I mean, you were saying, you know, that whole fading away, right? We talked about transhumanism. We talked about digital identities. We talked about genetic modifications. So I think these things might be in play, you know, in some form, and not because of human liberation, because or eliminating these isms, but it's because, at least I think, the capitalists don't see us as people, as life, as humans. They see us as numbers, as things that plug into their system. And so that artificial womb that you mentioned, Eduardo, I think it's a possibility, because why would you want to deal with abortion rights? You know, why would you want to have to hear from workers, you know, people who produce life? You know, what would you know, if you can produce it and skip that altogether and design perfect people or perfect humans that plug into their system? So I think all these things are in play.
Well, I'm not saying personally that artificial wombs won't be possible. I do believe that there are ways to, but I don't think the level of holistic care that happens in a woman's body compared to an artificial womb will ever be achieved. I want to be clear. Of course, you can grow things.
My point is that these people, the capitalists, so I hate that class, because they see us as things, right? Like I said, things that they can play, things that they can wave around, things that they can sacrifice, things that they can improve or modify. You know, that's what we are to them. You know, we are not life, we're not complexity. They want to eliminate complexity, actually. They want to simplify things. That's at least in my view. And that's why I'm fighting this fourth industrial revolution bullshit, because that's what I think is at stake. You know, as complicated as it is to have democracy and have debates and have disagreements and work through shit, you know, that's part of the, you know, being life to me in this world, organized life, human life. And to these people, we're just playthings, we're just numbers, we're just tools for their system, you know, and we are sacrificable, you know, disposable things, you know, and so that's what I want to make clear here. And so, yes, all these things are in play. You know, I don't know what things will materialize fully, you know, and part of it is, you know, challenging the reproductive power of women, you know, and so this is how wretched these people are. This is how evil, this is how ruthless, this is how soulless, unethical, whatever, use all those words these people are, because we're just numbers. And then they're weaponizing all this in terms of liberty in defending our rights, but they're not.
Well, there's a lot of stuff said. So let me see if I could. So the first thing,
maybe I have a question for you, Andy. Are you going to say something in response to mine? Because I don't know if I want to keep like mine. I'm willing.
No,
if anyone
yours was. I mean, I will say something in response. I thought what you said was good. Like,
was it? Because I honestly think that what I said didn't make any sense.
It does make sense. It makes sense to me. I think it makes sense to all of us here in light of the last episode, but also in light of just what you said. It makes sense. Okay. I mean, it's not like you've come to a conclusion, but you're some areas that were solid before are fuzzing out for you a little bit. That makes sense to me.
The reasons why I'm asking.
Doesn't it just say everything, that acknowledging that there are biological differences between women who give birth to children, and none of us would be here without our mother literally giving birth to us, that there's a difference between women and men, is literally considered right-wing now. That's crazy. That's a crazy cultural environment to try to like operate within.
That's what I'm taught. I know, Andy, you're going to have your turn. So I just want to say that's what I've been taught in liberal circles by women as well.
Yeah, 100%. Right. Me too. Yeah. But it's wild.
So the fact is that the notion of allowing things outside those boundaries was the notion of a liberation, that people could get outside of, that was the idea that people were free. I mean, if there was a left element to it, if there was a progressive element to it that I thought was there, it was the notion of, well, no, if that's something you want to do and it doesn't hurt somebody else, then you are free to do it. Now, the problem is that all of this occurs under a system that is entirely unfree, and is getting even worse than so. The capitalist system is an exploitative, oppressive system. It is a dictatorship, and I believe that because capitalism is getting deeper and deeper into protracted cycles of crises that are going to get ever worse, we're going to see its veneer of democracy is going to come off more and more, and its actual real state that it exists in, which is, in my opinion, is closer to like fascism. We're going to see it. We are going to see those features more and more. But the irony is that the language of inclusivity that says you could be any race. Well, yeah, you can be any race if you can strip a human's consciousness of themselves from their body and put somebody into the metaverse. Oh, anyone can have, we can talk about reproducing units, not women, because now we can actually take that whole experience and take it outside of the body and have it take place there. So that they're basically using the language of inclusivity to deepen our alienation from our own humanity. And a feature of one of the primary features of capitalism, in addition to class division and exploitation, is the experience of alienation of all workers. As the capitalist class gets strengthened and as the state gets strengthened, and I think that's what we're seeing. Now, they're going to put it under this veneer of equality, but hidden underneath this veneer of equality is a world that's going to get incredibly more unequal. And it's going to be more damaging to women and more damaging to men. And that's why I guess I will say, I want to come back to this question of hypocrisy on both sides is not it's not like, oh, isn't that ironic? Look, the Republicans who seemingly were for bodily autonomy with regards to COVID-19 vaccines, many of them are saying, no, women cannot decide. And then, of course, these other folks on the other side, on the left side, who seemingly were for a bodily autonomy as it relates to a woman's right to choose what she does with her body during a pregnancy, suddenly are going to say, no, everyone's got to get vaxxed, and your kids have to get vaxxed. So you have the right to choose, but then after that kid gets born, I'm going to choose whether that kid gets vaxxed. So that's not just a hypocrisy. I mean, it is hypocrisy, but what combines them both is a fealty and an honoring of this power of the state. Both of them are saying the real power lies with the power of the state to defend women's right to choose, or the state to defend my staying away from a vax mandate. And it's a myth, because that same state is an attack on both of us, on all women, and all women workers, I would say, and all male workers. And that's why for me to, in fighting this state, which is saying the state has the right to decide who gets access to abortion. And the state gets to decide, no, we declare it free for women. Now we're going to defend some sort of Roe v. Wade, and now we're going to provide state clinics that will then give these abortion. I don't think they've gained. I think women have not gained anything there if they get access to those. That's the thing that I think I've heard from Jessica before that I'm coming more to believe, and I believe that because the very same forces that told me that, we're for giving women access to abortion rights, those are the same ones who wanted me jabbed and gone from my job. Those are the same people. So I don't believe it. I believe that all they really are interested in is in making a stronger state. And I'm not interested in that. I think that state has to be dismantled. And so I don't believe in any state that is saying, we're going to fully fund Planned Parenthoods. Gone, get rid of it. That is not the way we're going to defend women's rights. That's not the way we're going to defend my rights, women's rights, anyone's rights, by strengthening that state or saying to that state, you're the one that can finally is the arbiter of that decision. Now, in the case of the article or the person, Yolanda, who was a friend of yours, or is a friend of yours, Jessica, who you would maybe even suggested we could interview her. She was going on to talk about other ways that have midwifery and other avenues of controlling your pregnancy through your own means, through means that don't require the state intervention, that are just like homegrown from the bottom. She described it as plant magic. I think there's other things that go on. And I actually think that is the road. That is the road to fighting for it's not just a question of abortion rights, for fighting for the liberty of all of us, is to separate that fight from the fight to strengthen the state. We actually have to see this fight as one of dismantling the state and producing our own way of living. And anyone who's caught up in defending Republicans Party or the Democratic Party to defend their sphere it's fool's gold, because you are really just strengthening the hand of people who are locking us all into a prison, this fourth industrial revolution prison that is taking advantage of our deep alienation to then make us question what it means to be human, what it means to be woman, what it means to be man, anything. And so that's something that was something that I feel like I heard from Jessica in this discussion, but earlier, that there's nothing to defend in Roe v. Wade because it doesn't exist. Because Roe v. Wade is as much an attack on women because it says that we as Supreme Court justices get to decide your future. And if they get to decide, then women are screwed, because we know they hate women. We know they hate men. We know they hate workers of all stripes and will sacrifice us for anything. So they cannot be trusted and entrusted. And it's not, I won't even say it's a fight for reform to try to get Roe v. Wade or even get the Democrats to pass a legislation that defends it, because this state cannot be trusted to protect us, because its own healthcare system is designed around making people sicker, so in order to obtain profits. And we're seeing that with this goddamn vax. I mean, it's true in other ways. It's becoming more apparent to me through the vaccine, the COVID vaccine. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of illuminate a parallel. So, Andy, when you're talking about plant medicine, right, as another approach to abortion specifically, or just healthcare, I actually think it's a really similar brainwashing that's occurred. And it's actually much more dominant in the culture, at least from my perspective, that in the same way that it is now deemed by liberals and pro-vaxxers that it is dangerous and irresponsible to rely on your immune system or to just get COVID, if COVID exists, to get it right, and just let your body naturally produce the antibodies, right? That's irresponsible. It's a very similar sort of fundamental lie that they've convinced basically our whole population of, that any sort of non-medicalized abortion is insane and you must be, a crazy person and you're dangerous and you're, endangering yourself, you're endangering the baby. This is just simply not true. And I think Yolanda touched on it in the article I sent around, which we can link. But really, like, this whole idea of the coat hanger abortion in the back alley, like, that was men. That was male doctors, who basically, on behalf of the state, intruded into women's spaces where previously birth and also like the release of pregnancies, whether through miscarriage or abortion, this was the realm of a community of women, right? Kind of like Federici was describing in the Middle Ages. Like, this is traditional midwifery, not midwives now they're state employees. Like, they operate under doctors, essentially carrying out the state's idea of healthcare. And so this idea that, like, we can't exist without the industrial medical system. You can't get an abortion. You can't have a cold. You can't, you can't even, it's really hard to, like, be pregnant and constantly have to refuse a flu shot, or if you don't want an ultrasound, right? Like, all of these things that are sold to us as, like, this is the healthcare, like, this is the healthcare you should fight for and vote for, and you need this, like, and like you said, Andy, not only do you need this, but we are the ones who can bequeath it to you. It's insane. And then I also just wanted to kind of connect what I just said to, like, I think Eduardo at one point used the word colonization, and Andy, like you said, alienation, and it goes for the whole, I don't even call it healthcare system, right? Like, it's a sick care system, but especially when it comes to, like, so-called reproductive services, right? Like, okay, industrial obstetrics, abortion services for sure, birth control consultations, routine pap smears, like mammograms, like the whole everything, like women's health, right? That whole world of reproductive care is just riddled with violence and sexism and racism and gaslighting and just massive, massive, massive disassociation from our bodies, which is a trauma response. So, like, that's what you're getting, like, when you go to these places, even in the best of circumstances, so many women experience trauma. And then what's the natural response to that? It's to disassociate from your body, which is exactly playing into the hands of the whole transhumanist thing, and so much of it too is just deeply unscientific, like, in terms of actually supporting health. It's just all of women's healthcare, like, it's just built on dehumanizing us, controlling us, colonizing us, colonizing the body. It really is. And there's so many things that have been sold to us, like Planned Parenthood and birth control, right? Like, in the kind of second wave women's liberation movement, like, the birth control pill still is widely revered as this thing which enabled us to suddenly control our own reproductive cycles and reproductive labor, as if we couldn't do that before, as if we hadn't been doing that for thousands of years. That here you go, and now you can, by nature of this pharmaceutical product, you can enter the workforce. So now we can exploit you another way, right? And everybody just forgets that the birth control pill came about because American white psychopaths and racists tested experimental products on poverty-stricken Puerto Rican women who had no fucking clue that many of them were basically signing up to be sterilized. you know, and Planned Parenthood, like that's Margaret Sanger too, right? That whole thing, like all the Planned Parenthood clinics, where did they come from? They emerged right out of the American eugenics movement. Like that's just a fact, and nobody wants to wrestle with that. Gynecology, like the founder of modern gynecology, the field of gynecology, Marion Jane Sims, I forget the order of his names, but that dude sliced open naked, terrified slave women on a table while her sisters were forced to hold her down because his assistants, his white doctor's assistants, could not stomach the sight of the surgeries, so-called surgeries that he was performing. Okay. And now like his invention, the Sims speculum, right? The vaginal speculum that they use in every other healthcare service, right? That was a rape instrument. So it's just like, I mean, I could go on and on, but from every single angle that you look at this, our entire medical system is built on torture and rape and slavery and colonization and witch hunts, right? Like you can't fucking reform it. You just can't. Like it's not ancient history, right? It's literally right now. You have like, you know, women in California who in 2020, you know, in ICE detention centers were forcibly sterilized, like against their will, given hysterectomies. You have, you know, whatever, half the population right now being experimented on with these, you know, so-called injections. There's no consent within the system. Like there's no help, there's no care. It does not allow for that. And so that's why I'm just not willing to spend my time and my energy begging, like, oh, please give me this healthcare, which I've literally spent the past like 5, 6, 7 years trying to undo what has been done to me. And I haven't even endured 1% of what so many women have endured. You know, even in the best cases, like if you have money, if you have insurance, if you have white skin, a nice doctor, like it doesn't matter. In this system, you are an object. You're data. Like you're not human. And I just think like I don't know, just the impact of that disassociation that results from this type of healthcare is just so underestimated, you know? And like we were talking earlier about disassociating us or alienating us, I think you said, from our labor and from our bodies. And like for women, like I didn't know how to properly track my fertility cycle until I was like 28, 29 years old. Like I had a master's degree, okay, before I could pinpoint like my own ovulation. And I think that is just a testament to how, I mean, that's insane. Like that is insane. You know, and I just think the physical and psychological and even like spiritual impact of denying this basic association with your own body and understanding of your own body, and you know, that should be sacred. Like that's sacred self-knowledge, especially when we talk about women and like creating life or destroying life. Because I mean that's like, yeah, you can try to create an artificial womb, but what are you basing it off? It's like our bodies that hold the wisdom, you know? And FYI too, it's a heck of a lot easier for a woman to avoid an unwanted pregnancy when she understands and trusts her own body, you know? So for a pro-lifer, like I'm not saying it's a fail-safe, but it'd be a good start, you know? That should be the fucking minimum. And this stupid society can't even do that.
Like, you know, I appreciate what you said, and at least for me, the point I've reached when I hear Roe v. Wade, I think of it as it's not about freedom, obviously. It's about regulating and also about channeling into Western style medicine that is very well attached to capitalism. And yeah, I have this quote, if I may, that is by John Trudell, and it talks about civilization, right? It says the great lie is that this is civilization. It's not civilized. It has literally been the most bloodthirsty, brutalizing system ever imposed upon this planet. This is not civilization. This is the great lie. Or if it does represent civilization, and that is truly what civilization is, then the great lie is that civilization is good for us. And it makes me think too, a little bit, and like about why we tend to we've been indoctrinated into accepting as civilized, as proper, indoctrinated by private interests, really, because it makes me think of my life outside this country, as a kid and as an adult. And like to a lot of people who have grown in this system, anything that departs from the rules and the strict guidelines and the knowledge of experts, anything that deviates from that, it's savage. That anything that deviates from that it's uncivilized. Everything, a lot of people who are brown and are supposed to be in my same, have had my same experience. That people that have never lived abroad, they go into other places and they look at chaos. They don't see that there is order within people. People are able to organize themselves. It may not look as pretty as fucking Anaheim that it was designed for, bullshit, but there is order, and masses of people live, in alternative ways to the mainstream capitalist system, or at least they find workarounds, to survive and live outside of this system, even though this system still makes it really hard. And I guess, that's kind of my hope, that's the way to resist, right? To go outside this system, to say, fuck your laws. I don't care about your fucking impositions, and because I know what you're up to. I know how you see life, how you see humanity. And so that's why, it's much for me to learn. You just said a bunch of things that I wasn't aware of, to be honest. And that's part of the process, right? That's what we talk about, this thing. And that's why I want to connect it to Eduardo, because like shaming is not going to work. Shaming is going to, like, you should have known that, or you're dumb, or, or you're just a dumb man. Like none of that will work. We will have to have these tough conversations where we are corrected, where we gain knowledge. But we also have to come from a point where we realize that this shit is not working. This bullshit called civilization is not civilized. It's fucking brutal. And it's brutalizing people in every way. And defending crimes like Roe v. Wade, it's actually, us setting ourselves up for an imprisonment, in a delay of the fight that we must battle, must take upon, right? Like to really undo this system and run things the way we've done it, the way humanity has done for thousands of years, right? When we had to improve some things, obviously, we have had to learn some lessons. But again, the lesson for me is that I don't care for this Western style of medicine. It's not the only path. There's plenty of knowledge. I truly believe that. And we need to rescue that in order to fight the system. That is very boxy, and the path of this system is very limiting. Just one quick thing, the other reason that animates what I just said was that a coworker that, was supposed to come work with me, but remember how we had the vaccine, anti-vax, quote unquote, episode? So his kid is in the hospital because he got an adverse reaction to a fucking vaccine for his baby.
Well, I guess what I would say is I'm really glad we've done this episode. It's definitely, if you go back and listen to our old, I think we did 2 previous episodes talking about our support of a woman's right, access to abortion and right to choose and control of her own body. But this has been a different conversation. And it's taken 2 years for me to arrive at a point where some of the things that Jessica raised before this episode and during this episode are like, yeah, I'm very much now much more pointed towards not just that Roe v. Wade is a crumb or Planned Parenthood is crumbs. They're actually part of the prison. They're part of the construction of a trap that are made to it. That is, in this case, structured primarily to attack women, but because it strengthens the state, it is an attack on us all, because that same state will use those same forces and powers that it says that if we give it the right to control women over here and say, oh, you can or you can't, by virtue of what the state says, compared to what the woman herself says is that she wants and then chooses to make real for herself, then you give that state the right to do that to anyone. And so we have to fight that. So I'm really glad we've had this episode. I think, Jessica, if you weren't part of our group right now, I think this conversation would have just sounded different. So I'm really so glad you've joined What's Left. I think I will take one issue with the way, when I hear you say, look, at that moment when a person's like a woman's having a baby, or that's all women thing. There will be the woman having the baby, but like for me, if I was, me and Brandy aren't going to have kids, but if it was me with Brandy, I would care about that moment. And I would care about it, not to control it, but to say Brandy has to have whatever she needs to be comfortable. But I'm going to feel like I want to be part of that. And to say I'm not part of that actually seems not, and alienated in terms of the relations that humans have. Because I do think men have a stake in what happens with children. Like, I think it matters to them. And it certainly matters to me as a teacher. It matters to me if I don't have a kid, but it matters to me when I think of nieces and nephews. So maybe I think I have a, geez, can you hear my dog in the background? Oh, sorry.
Well, part of it too.
Yeah. So Gizmo cares too. He wants it. But so that's the part, Jessica, and I'm not sure what you mean when I hear in that is to say men out. And I also want to say that we're not going to solve this unless women and men who care about equality and who care about justice decide to get on the same page and fight for it. And so what I hear in that part of it is that sort of divisive language that seems unnecessary and a little actually unhuman, because it's not actually how we are. It's not like, oh, thank God all the teachers are women so they are nice to the kids. It's like there are male teachers who are very nurturing and caring of children. And it wasn't because they had them, because they didn't. So it's because they care about them, because to love and to care is human. So that's the one thing I would take issue.
I just want to clarify. I am not arguing that you men should not or cannot be part of the process, especially if you're the parent. I'm just arguing, which you just said, like it's in that scenario that it would be Brandy's choice of how to give birth, and what support she would need. And what I heard you say is, I would want to be part of it in order to support and honor her in bringing life into the world, right? And that's what we should. And I actually think that industrial obstetrics, I think it's really like gross the effect it has on men too. I mean, obviously, like the bulk of the conversation revolves around the trauma that women undergo, but I think it's very emasculating, and I think it's part of even that whole dynamic we talked about last week with Dea about breaking families. I think in a healthy society, right, like the woman would get to have the birth or whatever reproductive context, would get to, I don't even want to say be empowered, because empowered just doesn't fucking mean anything anymore. It's like code for some sinister shit. But that she would be in her power, right? And that's a time for the woman to be honored, and that it's actually healthy, and I don't want to use the gendery term, right? Like masculine, but that it would be, right? Like whatever, healthy masculinity. I think we'd be living in a whole different society if, women weren't giving birth like drugged on their backs with their feet in stirrups, like they're about to be tortured, and the man is sitting there waiting for the doctor to deliver the baby, not for the woman to deliver her own baby, but literally it's something that is done to her, and the same thing with abortion. I mean, however you feel morally about it, it's a really intense thing to go through. And I think the way that it's treated, even in the most liberally, like your body, your choice scenarios, like the whole industrial system, you're an object. You sign the form and then they do what they want to you. And then we won't go down this rabbit hole today, but I mean, the other part of the whole fourth industrial revolution is that embryonic, embryos, stem cells, cord blood, placentas, this shit is worth a lot of money. And it is, and even just for a woman giving birth, like in a hospital with no complications, right? It's very difficult sometimes, even if she wants to take her own placenta home with her. And that's not just like a surface level controlled thing. It's worth money. And it has to do with a lot of this transhumanist research and the whole big fertility industry and the artificial wombs and the research, right? It's not healthcare. Like research is always prioritized over healthcare when it comes to allocation of money, how this all goes down. So yeah, I guess that's.
Can I comment?
Yeah.
My ex partner who is a doula, she told me that very same thing about you're not able to have even the right to use your own placenta. She was born at home here in San Francisco, and her the midwife of her mother they would take the placenta and then they would eat it. That this is her mother who would eat it, and then that's very common in many places. But here in the U.S. culture, it's like, oh my God, what? It's like, but I've heard lots of stories like that from my ex-partner, and she has really enlightened me on those differences. And I remember in conversations we would privately have, not in a public forum like this, it was strange for me to hear this person with very progressive views say, I just think that fundamentally is a difference between men and women around this. And that is something that you'll never understand. I think that you can attempt to, but just being in my body, I've experienced things differently from you, Eduardo. And that really didn't fit well with me. I didn't like it. I thought she was kind of, so I don't know if now I feel like I'm reverting back to wanting to listen to more of that conversation. I'm not sure, but this conversation around has inspired is not the word, has evoked, has sort of made me think twice, have made me want to see where I'm at with all of it, and maybe even have a conversation with her. And I was thinking too, I listen to KPFA, and I was listening to the interviews that were done for women that in 1960 something, that were about, let me see, I can pull up the tab here, that were about the Janes. I don't know if you heard about the Janes, that there's a film now even about the Janes in Chicago that were giving access to abortions to women. And it was started out by a student, I think. And the point is, it's just like all of this underground networks of women taking up their up on their own and to build, I don't know how else to call it, like mutual aid forms of being able to take care of each other, because it was obviously criminal to have an abortion, and here it is. And so it just so I really wanted to just end this by saying, or like at least my comments, just folks can look at the Jane Collective, which was formed in 1968 in Chicago, where a college student and civil rights activist named Heather both sought help finding a doctor to help desperate friend who needed an abortion, and then they created the Janes, and so that I think was interesting. And I also listened to a podcast called The Reveal, and they were talking about the calculator that is used on women to determine if you're going to have a C-section or not. And this is also another, another assault, just way of people, the medical system. That's why I'm thinking about this, as you said, that it's like, how do you call it the health or medical system that is supposed to help you, supposedly, when you have these calculators that were used, that were originally intended to be used basically first on Black people to see if they were being used on slave women. The father gynecologist, forget his name, but we're using these calculators in order to determine if men, Blacks or whites or any other race, what were the percentages of being able to get, because they thought Black women could withstand pain, and then they thought Black women don't know how to give birth right because they don't have the right bodily anatomy, so they would make them take these tests, right? And if you're Black or you're Latina, you would have the level of you getting a C-section would just be, the percentage of you would be up, and you would just be determined, and doctors would say, we're going to have a C-section for you, without really knowing their body or not even asking them about their history or whatever. And so I was thinking about that as we're talking about this industry, the institutions, how it's been so invasive and determinant on women's bodies, such as that calculator that was used, the reproductive calculator. And even just our cultural thoughts, or the way we think about how much we put the responsibility on women and on like sex issues, for example. Because I was listening to the BBC, and there is a pill now, a reproductive pill, a contraceptive pill that is now being used, right? And this pill, and they were interviewing lots of men, and lots of men who don't want to take it. I was just thinking how culturally we've just allowed women to always take up that responsibility of making sure that they're the ones who are not going to allow for women, for a child to be born. They're not going to get pregnant. We put that onus on them. And yet here in the conversation is about life, and we talk about, or at least, the conversation for the pro-lifers is that, women should get, life, we should be taking care of life. But then when we talk about men taking these pills, most likely men are not going to take contraceptive pills, because we always leave it's the onus is on the women to make sure that they don't get to prevention. So we have so much pressure. So you're not allowed to get, you're not allowed to get an abortion. You're made to take these stupid racist and sexist tests, and you're also made to be aware of it's your responsibility to make sure that you don't get pregnant, because it's going to be your fault if you didn't take care of making sure we prevented being pregnant. So I'm thinking of how much all of these things intersect, and how much it's just really, I'm aware of these things as I'm thinking about all of the issues that we talked about.
And it's not just responsibility, like for a lot of women, hormonal birth control has side effects.
Yes.
And it's just like with COVID vaccines, right? Like it's completely normalized inside the medical system and in the culture at large, that's just fine. And some of them are very severe.
Just gotta follow the science, right? That's what they say.
Yeah.
Trust the science. Just get any vaccine, anything, doesn't matter. Drink any pills.
It works on rodents. It works on
it's just, I guess this is a little, maybe deviates, you can cut it if you want, but it's just, again, this just automatic trust in Western science and Western medicine. And like, there's no accident this country is so highly medicated, like compared to other countries. And and it's just automatic. And also like on this issue of, you know, birth control and stuff, like I agree with you, Eduardo, and like I you know, definitely had conversations with friends about, you know, this topic. And but I know that there was, for example, the possibility, or they were researching the possibility of injecting males in their testicles, you know, as a, and like that also doesn't make it right. You know, more of the same bullshit doesn't make it right. You know, that's kind of the point I wanted to make.
I have a closing reading when we're done if people want it.
You should do it, because I think this would be a good closeout.
Okay. So it's just about a page. So this is from The Handmaid's Tale. And I was thinking about it because so many liberals are just going crazy right now, screaming like, oh my God, it's Gilead. We're living in The Handmaid's Tale. You know, they're treating women as incubators. And those people would be correct in some sense, right? As we've covered. But I'm going to read this page, and I want people's memory to be jogged. Like if you've seen the show or you read the book, about how the Society of Gilead came to be. So I'll just read like about a page. Let's see here. Okay. Okay. So this is the main character. And this is the background about a little bit about how America turned into Gilead. Okay. I worked transferring books to computer disks to cut down on storage space and replacement costs, they said. Diskers, we called ourselves. We called the library a discotheque, which was a joke of ours. After the books were transferred, they were supposed to go to the shredder, but sometimes I took them home with me. I liked the feel of them and the look. Luke said I had the mind of an antiquarian. He liked that. He liked old things himself. All those women having jobs. Hard to imagine now, but thousands of them had jobs, millions. It was considered the normal thing. Now it's like remembering the paper money, when they still had that. My mother kept some of it, pasted it into her scrapbook along with the early photos. It was obsolete by then. You couldn't buy anything with it. Pieces of paper, thickish, greasy to the touch, green colored, with pictures on each side. Some old man in a wig, and on the other side, a pyramid with an eye above it. It said, "In God we trust." My mother said people used to have signs beside their cash registers for a joke. "In God we trust, all others pay cash." That would be blasphemy now. You had to take those pieces of paper with you when you went shopping. Though by the time I was 9 or 10, most people used plastic cards. Not for the groceries, though. That came later. It seems so primitive, totemistic even, like cowrie shells. I must have used that kind of money myself a little before everything went on the CompuBank. I guess that's how they were able to do it in the way they did, all at once, without anyone knowing beforehand. If there had still been portable money, it would have been more difficult. It was after the catastrophe when they shot the president and machine-gunned the Congress, and the army declared a state of emergency. They blamed it on the Islamic fanatics at the time. Keep calm, they said on television. Everything is under control. I was stunned. Everyone was. I know that. It was hard to believe. The entire government gone like that. How did they get in? How did it happen? That was when they suspended the Constitution. They said it would be temporary. There wasn't even any rioting in the streets. People stayed home at night, watching television, looking for some direction. There wasn't even an enemy you could put your finger on. Look out, said Moira to me over the phone. Here it comes. Here comes what, I said. You wait, she said. They've been building up to this. It's you and me up against the wall, baby. She was quoting an expression of my mother's, but she wasn't intending to be funny. Things continued in that state of suspended animation for weeks, although some things did happen. Newspapers were censored and some were closed down for security reasons, they said. The roadblocks began to appear, the identipasses. Everyone approved of that, since it was obvious you couldn't be too careful. They said the new elections would be held, but that it would take some time to prepare for them. The thing to do, they said, was to continue on as usual.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh Lord.
Jeez. Well,
I have no idea what she's talking about.
Yeah. Identipass, never heard of it.
Yeah, I'm glad we had this discussion today. It's good.
yeah. And I'll just quote from a tweet that I think we know someone who said this. Stop asking for reproductive rights from your government, the medical industry, insurance companies, men, God, or any abusive center of power. You need a permission slip. You need a permission slip from no one. And women have been having abortions with or without permission for thousands of years. You need knowledge and sisterhood, two things systematically denied to women in the modern era. Take them back and then extend them to as many others as possible. Thank you, Jess, for that tweet.
Had to make me follow Margaret Atwood.
Well, I was going to say it at the end anyhow, but you decided to pull out the page. I was like, okay.
Thank you.
And I will post the thing that Jessica, those things that you sent us about, on this episode, because I think it's worth people reading.
All right. Well, that was a lively discussion. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast Latino challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests in the episode notes where we found this episode, or on our blog at what-s-left.webmail.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast Latino there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you have heard here, please follow us. You can subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links and stuff that we've talked about, and those links that we've mentioned in the episode notes where we found this episode. And if you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-hosts Jessica, Kenny Cepeda, and Andy Lewson. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you all next week. Well, they'll see you all next week. Ciao.